So why don't we slowly start again? Excellent. Yay. Hi, I'm Dédé. Take two. So I'm here this morning, Joanne and Marnie, or evening today. Joanne and Marnie from Everyday Nutrition asked us to do a Facebook Live with all of you to talk to you about how to make great tasting low FODMAP recipes. And I had explained a little bit before that I live the diet. I've been on the diet for 3 years. It changed my life. And as a recipe developer, I've been in this business for 30 years. When I first discovered the low and high FODMAP foods, that for me, it actually was exciting because the randomness of the foods, I realized kind of matched the randomness of my IBS symptoms, and I saw light at the end of the tunnel. And I also, because I'm a recipe developer, immediately saw the possibilities of all the foods that I could make. And I decided to devote myself full-time to creating low FODMAP content. If you haven't visited FODMAP Everyday yet, I invite you to, because I think you'll see right away from the pictures and for the titles of the recipes you will see the kinds of recipes that we are trying to bring to you. Our motto is that we want to teach you how to thrive on the low FODMAP diet. So what I'm going to talk about today is, first of all, what's the same and what's different, right? All of us had sort of a life before this diet, and now we have a life with this diet. And the consistent thing is that we need breakfast, we need lunch, we need dinner, we need snacks, we need, foods to prepare for weeknight meals. We want to be able to still host parties. But now we have to figure how to do this in a low FODMAP way. So I'm going to first talk about, what's the same and what's different. And let's talk about what's the same first, because what's the same is the stuff that you don't have to change or alter, but there are a few things that maybe you can fine tune that are going to make your recipes better than ever. Now, I don't know if some of you saw, I promised that I was going to bring props, which scared Robin, is bringing stuff in the door this morning, but let me just show you something. I want to talk to you a little bit about, first let's talk about ingredients. So high quality ingredients, whether you're cooking low FODMAP or not, you really need to have high quality ingredients. We're mostly going to be talking about cooking from scratch today. So especially with the low FODMAP diet, where there are restrictions, where we're not chopping up onions and adding them to our dishes, unless, of course, you've luckily passed that fructan challenge. But let's talk about elimination phase stuff and cooking in general. We have to think about ways to infuse flavor into our food. So it's very, very important that our ingredients are high quality. So if you have dried herbs and spices that have been hanging around for more than 6 months, it's time to throw those out and to buy new ones. There really is a huge difference in the freshness, and that's going to help your cooking be that much better. I love buying spices and herbs in bulk. It's more economical that way, so that's something you could check into if you haven't already. And then even just salt and pepper, really good pure salt, freshly ground black pepper, light years different than little cans of pre-ground pepper. So really simple changes like that. And then here's one of my props. Ta-da! This is one of my favorite things. So what is this? What is this, you might be wondering? This is scallions that I'm growing in a glass. And that's because, did you know that you could do that? So you can see that they're at all different stages. So here's a scallion that I already used the green tops of the other day, but it still has its root. And if you put it in water, you can regrow the greens. And these are the parts that we can use that are low FODMAP. And this is a great way to have scallions around all the time. So those scallion greens are there. So let's look at a recipe. Let's talk about onions and garlic for a moment. Let's take a recipe that maybe you have your grandmother's pot roast recipe, and it called for sauteing an onion and lots of garlic in a Dutch oven, and then putting your meat in and browning your meat. And we all know by now that the fructans and onion and garlic are things that we have to either steer clear of completely, or perhaps on your challenge you now know that you can add a little bit, but we can still add onion and garlic flavor to the oil because the fructans are not oil soluble. This is of great confusion to many people. They don't understand how we can sort of have the onion and garlic flavor, but that there are parameters. And so the parameters are that if you put oil in your pan and you chop up those scallion greens or your leek greens, or take pieces of garlic and saute them, or even onion, and saute them in the oil, and then remove the solids. Oh, excuse me, I'm confusing you. The solids of the onion or the garlic, then the flavor left behind will be low FODMAP. The scallion greens and leek greens you can leave in. You can leave in your pot. So these are ways to infuse your cooking with onion and garlic flavor and still remain low FODMAP. Cooking techniques remain the same as well. So sauteing, broiling, none of that is going to be any different. And so you're going to continue to do all of that you used to do. And equipment is the same, but there's a caveat here. We need to talk about amounts, because hopefully by now you know that the low FODMAP diet is very portion dependent. For instance, look what just recently happened to honey. We can have a tiny little bit of honey. It is not completely off limits, but we have to understand what the amounts are, and we need to measure them accurately. So I have a few things to say about amounts. If you're following recipes from Australia, it's a little confusing. All around the world, teaspoons are 5 milliliters, but everywhere except Australia, 3 of these make a tablespoon. So 3 of these would equal 15 milliliters. However, in Australia, 4 teaspoons make a tablespoon. So their tablespoons are 20 milliliters. So if you read a recipe and it says 1 tablespoon of something, honey, sugar, salt, whatever it is that you have, you need to know what kind of tablespoon, where did the recipe hail from? So if it's an Australian recipe, and of course the diet being founded in Australia, we're going to have a lot of recipes coming out of Australia. So understand the difference between the tablespoons. And then let's talk about tablespoons themselves for a moment. So you can see that these tablespoons that I have here are pretty heavy duty. They're really heavy stainless steel. They're very well made. And I'm actually a stickler for measuring equipment. And that's because certain companies will create their tablespoons, their measuring spoons, and create their dry measuring cups in a way where they are calibrated to match governmental weights and measures. Okay, what do I mean by that? Here is a 1/2 cup measuring cup. Again, very well made stainless steel. Let's say you have a 1/2 cup measuring cup that you picked up at a tag sale. Or maybe you have one that was handed down from a family member and it's got dents in it. Or maybe you picked one up at the dollar store. Who made that measuring cup? Do we know if they really cared about what the measurement was? I mean, I know this is a little mind-blowing, but you've probably never thought about this before. You probably thought that if something said 1/2 cup on it, that it was going to be a 1/2 cup. But years ago at Gourmet Magazine, we did this test where we had all the editors bring in their sets of tablespoons from home, and pretty much every set was different. And then they took salt, they measured the tablespoons of salt, and then they weighed the tablespoons of salt. And the differences in the weights was more than 100%. More than 100%. Some weighed 7 grams, some weighed 15 grams. It was insane. And when I read that story, it truly spun my head around, because I realized that for years I had just been assuming that since I was using a set of measuring spoons that they were accurate, but not all are. So what I'm getting at is that you have to invest in high quality measuring cups, measuring spoons. Use liquid measuring cups for when you're measuring liquid. And this is because, since we are talking about very specific amounts of foods when we're cooking low FODMAP, all the more reason to be really specific. So that's what I'm going to say about measuring cups. One other thing, I don't know if, can you guys see this? It says 3/4 cup on it. This is like, I love these things. So most measuring cup sets come with a 1/4, a half, sometimes an 1/8. There'll be a 1 cup measuring cup. So let's say you have a recipe that calls for 3/4 of a cup of sugar. Well, normally you have to go in with your 1/2 cup, and then you have to go in with your 1/4 cup. And because you are measuring twice, you have a greater risk of mismeasuring. Whereas if you can go in once, you will be taking out that variability. Now, someone just posted a question. Lisa says she's from the UK, she's new to FODMAP, and it all confuses her at the moment. I want to address Lisa. First of all, welcome. Thank you for coming. Since we're talking about measurements, let's also talk about metric for a moment, because she's probably dealing with metric food or measurements in recipes. At FODMAP Everyday, we always make a point of every recipe is going to be presented to you in imperial and metric. So at least, Lisa, in that regard, we've taken care of math for you. As far as the diet being confusing, it absolutely is and can be, but the fact that you're here, you are already so far ahead of so many other people. The problem, of course, is not only can the diet be complex, but there are also resources that are really there to help you. Joanna and Marnie at Everyday Nutrition are one of the best around, so you are doing the right thing for yourself, and it is going to get clearer and it is going to get easier, and hopefully there's statistically a really good chance that you're going to find some healing and health as well. So let's get back to this for a moment. I've been talking about what's the same, and I was talking about equipment. So equipment is going to be the same. These are 2 cake pans, and I brought these in just to sort of make a point. One of these is an 8-inch or 20 centimeter pan, and one of these is a 9-inch or 23 centimeter pan. And a lot of times if you're making cakes, it could be a coffee cake, could make a layer cake, your recipe is going to specify the size pan. And believe me, I understand that it can be easy to quickly make substitutions in your mind. The recipe calls for 8-inch. All you have at home is a 9-inch pan. You decide to throw that batter in the 9-inch pan. I implore you not to do that, because the recipe developer has developed the recipe in a very specific way for specific reasons. And if you substitute equipment, for instance, the results are not going to be the same. It's not going to bake the same. The texture is going to be different. Portion control, portion sizing is going to be very different, and that is very important for us on the low FODMAP diet. So what I always recommend to people when they're following a recipe is make it as it's written the first time, like to the letter, and then make notes. Okay, so you make the recipe, you make notes for yourself, you say, I could use a little more salt in this. I could, the cooking time was 10 minutes longer, whatever the notes are. And that way, when you go to make it the second time, you can make adjustments. Now, of course, since we're following the low FODMAP diet, we also have to remember that we still have to adhere to the diet protocol. So for instance, let's say you're eating something that had nuts in it and you feel like it needed more nuts. We can't just willy-nilly add more nuts to the recipe because it could throw the FODMAP load. So make a recipe as it's written first, make notes for yourself. Perhaps there are low FODMAP adjustments that can be made, and then you can feel free to do that. Or if you absolutely feel like you need more nuts per serving in whatever it is that you're making, maybe you're going to reduce the serving size, and then proportionately there will be more nuts. So there's ways to get around it and things like that. So let's talk about what's different. We're sort of segueing into that. The difference between cooking before you're on this diet and cooking now is all about the FODMAP content, because as I said, your high quality ingredients are the same, your high quality equipment is the same, and your techniques are the same. So understanding FODMAP content is really the key to all of this. You're here, you are part of Everyday Nutrition's Challenge program, so you already know the drill. You know that there are resources that are going to better equip you to understand what are low and high FODMAP foods. And if you're joining us after the fact and you're not part of the program, all of this messaging remains the same. We at FODMAP Everyday are partial to the Monash University smartphone app. We reference it several times a day. We see questions all the time. Is it really worth the money? Yes, it's worth your $8 to get this app. You will be able to, on the fly, if you're at a restaurant, you can look up an ingredient while you're ordering. If you're in the supermarket and you have a question about an ingredient, you can reference it there. And if you're cooking at home, you can look up things very, very easily. The other thing is, as you are familiarizing yourself with the diet, it is really helpful to have someone who's a registered dietitian, perhaps even trained by Monash, help you. You do not have to be alone. That is why Everyday Nutrition exists, why Joanna and Marnie are talking this gospel every day, as we are at FODMAP Everyday. We are here creating resources for you so you do not have to be alone. There are many people undertaking this diet who are at the same stage of the diet as you, who maybe have gone a little further than you and can help you in retrospect with some real practical, real world information. And then of course, there are professionals like Marnie and Joanna who can help answer your questions. So let's talk about one thing that's a little confusing, but I do want to address, and I know that this is something that Joanna talks about a lot, and she and I were talking about it recently, and that's this sort of confusing place where the diet, the granular details of the diet meet this more broad viewpoint. So stick with me for a moment. Let's say something says you can have 2 ounces of something, or it says you can have 1 tablespoon of something. Those measurements are real. The food stuff was measured in a lab. Somebody like Monash or FODMAP Friendly has taken the time to accurately figure out how much of a food is low FODMAP. And so that is a detail, right? It's a very specific amount. However, maybe you make a mistake. Maybe you put, you measure something incorrectly and a little extra something gets in your dish. Or maybe the serving size was supposed to be, serve 6 and you end up serving 4 and you realize you ate a much larger portion. So here's the deal. The sort of overarching view that we all take is that really your relationship with the food and your relationship with a recipe, how you serve it, how you ultimately make it, is going to be very individual in the sense that your individual reaction to eating something could be different than everybody else's, right? So I might be able to eat a sixth of something, and you might be able to eat a quarter of something. Even though we both started with the same information about, oh, this is, you have to be very specific with the amount of whatever you have. So what I'm trying to get at is, I like to be armed with the information. I like to know what all those granular details are, because then I feel like I have a basis from which to develop a recipe, or a basis from which to decide how much of something to eat. But ultimately, what's going to be the most important is how my gut reacts to that food. If I find out that I can eat more of something, then good for me. If I find out that I have to eat a little less of something, or not eat it 2 days in a row, then that's my answer for that particular food. And that is just as valuable, if not more valuable, information. Lisa's saying that the diet is not quite as popular in the UK, and her GI specialist suggested the diet, but her general practitioner knows nothing about it. She's thanking us for being online. Lisa, I have to tell you, the same thing happens in the US. We have general practitioners. Actually, very few general practitioners really even know about the diet. Most GIs do. The issue is that a lot of GIs, because they're not in the trenches really dealing with low FODMAP every day, they often have out-of-date printouts. Perhaps your GI specialist gave you a list of high or low FODMAP foods. Chances are it would be better for you to stick with something that's updated, like the Monash app, or to talk in Marnie and Joanna's groups and ask specific questions, because you'll get much better answers to what you're looking for. So let's talk about baking. Baking is one of my specialties. Many of my books were focused on baking, and there's a lot of questions when it comes to low FODMAP baking. Flour, of course, figures heavily into whether we're baking breads, cakes, cookies, or what have you. So let's talk about that for a moment. If you go on your app or you look at your resources, you will be able to see a list of flours that are approved as low FODMAP. The problem with that is that if you have a recipe, let's just take chocolate chip cookies. If you have chocolate chip cookie recipe, and that recipe was classically developed with a wheat flour, that is high FODMAP, but you want to recreate that chocolate chip cookie in the best way possible, how are you going to do that? Well, the problem is that looking at those individual flours in your app, for instance, are not going to do the trick. You can't just use rice flour, and you can't just use tapioca flour. So that's why I usually rely on a blend, a low FODMAP flour blend that takes different flours that all together more recreate the texture that I'm looking for in the final product. I also am partial to flour blends that use xanthan gum, and this is always a great discussion in the Facebook groups. Now, it is true that some people do react, have digestive upset with gums, but they are low FODMAP. So guar gum and xanthan gum are low FODMAP. And so if we're looking at things strictly from a FODMAP perspective, then blends that contain xanthan gum are fine. And the xanthan gum, the reason why it's there is because it's going to help bring a texture to those low FODMAP flours that ultimately is going to better recreate wheat flour. So to start, I would suggest a blend that does contain xanthan gum, and I do, as again said, do suggest a blend, because that blend of sort of softer starches and less soft flours all told together is going to better replicate wheat flour. But I don't necessarily go 1 for 1. Now, what I mean by that is if your chocolate chip cookie recipe calls for 1 cup of flour, I don't necessarily substitute with 1 cup of a low FODMAP substitute. And that's because the low FODMAP flours, rice, sorghum, all those different flours are heavier. So I tend to look at weights when I'm substituting and try to go that route. If I can't go that route, then for every 1 cup of wheat flour, I would suggest you start with 14 tablespoons of your substitute low FODMAP flour. So that would be 1 cup minus 2 tablespoons. You can measure it out any which way you want. Try that, because if you go 1 for 1, you might end up with too heavy of a product. Now, in terms of converting existing recipes beyond flour, you will most likely have to look at serving sizes. So let's stick with chocolate chip cookies for a moment. There's butter in them. Butter's fine. Butter's a fat. It's low FODMAP naturally, no problem there. It will have brown sugar and or white sugar added to the mix. Sugars are low FODMAP as well. The problem is that when you look at a lot of the apps and the different charts, it will often say 1 tablespoon of sugar is recommended. And certainly we're using multiple tablespoons in a recipe. So here's the deal on that. We have a lot of sweet recipes at FODMAP Everyday. 50 of them are certified by Monash University, and several of the ones that went through the certification process are sweet and use a fair amount of sugar. So you might be wondering, well, how does that all add up together? Well, that's because after we've had many conversations with the folks at Monash, their recommendations for sugar on the app are mostly based on healthy eating guidelines. So they're saying 1 tablespoon of sugar per serving is really what they think is a max for a healthy serving guideline. And we agree. However, every now and then, as a special treat, if we want to make chocolate chip cookies, if we want to make a birthday cake, there's going to be more sugar per serving, and that's going to be okay from a low FODMAP perspective. Then let's talk about leaveners. Baking soda's fine, baking powder's fine. If you are following a gluten-free diet for any reason at all, you will want to look for baking powder that is gluten-free. Vanilla extract, vanilla essence for many of you in the other parts of the world is fine as well. And then the egg is fine, egg is protein, so that's gonna go in. And then the flour, as I said, if you're gonna make substitutions, try to do it weight for weight, or if you can't do that, for every 1 cup of all-purpose wheat flour, I would substitute 14 tablespoons, which is 3/4 of a cup plus 2 tablespoons for the full cup, which is 16 tablespoons. So you're going to be adding slightly less, 2 tablespoons less of the substituted flour. Now, actually, Robin, if you can come in here and help me for a moment. This program is sucking down my battery, so she's going to have to help me plug this in here. So who has questions about converting recipes? Like, do any of you have a recipe that maybe you loved to make before you were following the diet, and now you're trying to figure out how to make it now that you're following the low FODMAP diet? I would love to do sort of a on-the-fly conversation with one of you if you have a specific recipe question. But let's just talk about popular things. Pasta. I think pasta is always very popular, and I tend to go for gluten-free pasta, for rice-based pasta, but depending on how your digestion handles classic pasta, you might be able to handle a little bit of that as well. But the sauces, you know, Italian food and Mexican food in particular are usually so filled with onion and garlic. So let's just go over that a little bit. Again, you can use onion infused oil, shallot infused oil, garlic infused oil to bring lots of flavor to your recipes. You could also take oil, put it in a Dutch oven or a pan, saute actual onion or garlic around there in the pan, and as long as you remove all the solids, you're good to go, because the fructans are not oil soluble. If you want to have onion flavor left in your dish to add body, let's say to your spaghetti sauce or something that you're making like that, you can use, as I mentioned before, lots of scallion greens and leek greens. These are scallions growing in a glass. If you didn't see these before, I use so many scallion greens and leek greens, I have to keep them growing. So those can be chopped up and added to your mix as well. So, you know, onion and garlic is very interesting. They add more than onion and garlic flavor. They add a savoriness. They add sort of this all over flavor that can be missing in a lot of dishes that we're now cooking, and things can come out a little flat, which is why I was talking about salt and pepper and herbs and spices before. And I'll just mention that again. The quality of your herbs and spices and your salt and pepper is so important, more important than ever before. Make sure that your dried herbs and spices are fresh. If they've been around for 6 months or more, toss them. Freshly ground pepper, get a pepper mill. If you've never had one before, now's the time to get it. And also adding acid, adding something acidic to our cooking can really just brighten it up. So lemon juice, different kinds of vinegars added to dishes might add a little something that's missing. Linda Ryman, where are you? Hello. She just said hi. I don't know where she's joining us from. She has there's a gorgeous photo that she uses for her main photo. Maybe she's from down under somewhere. Linda, do you have any specific questions? Or again, if any of you want to pitch me a recipe that you want me to take a stab at, that would be, I'd love to do that. So Liz, you can make, we were talking about Italian food. So when you're making a tomato sauce, it's bold and delicious. And Mexican food, I mentioned Mexican food. It's difficult. Certainly eating out at Mexican restaurants remains a challenge for me, maybe for you as well. But if you cook at home, you can use your scallion greens, your leek greens to bring that garlic, that oniony flavor. You can use garlic oil to bring the garlic flavor in. You can make a fresh salsa with, right now in the US, Linda says she's in Washington State, so she's up early. Thank you so much for joining us. So right now in the US, tomatoes are like bursting in the gardens, and jalapeno peppers, and you can make a fresh salsa with tomato with a little bit of spicy pepper. Use a little garlic oil to get some garlic flavor in there if you want. Chop up scallion greens, a little salt and pepper, a little lime juice, and you're done. You've got a, oh, someone said they lost the feed. Just gonna check with Robin. Robin, they didn't, is everyone else still there? They didn't cut us off, did they? The tech people? Just wondering if they cut us off. All right, I'm gonna keep talking. Well, what else would you guys like to know? I mean, what I'm trying to get at is that a lot of what you're doing before FODMAP and after FODMAP is going to be the same. I'm going to do a recap. Your high quality ingredients are going to be the same. Your techniques are going to be the same. Your equipment is going to be the same. But your ingredients, you're going to have to take a good look at your ingredients. You're going to have to pay attention to portion size. You're going to hopefully integrate tricks with scallion greens, leek greens, get all that onion flavor into your dishes that maybe you've been missing. Oh, that's so funny, Roxanne. She just either I imprinted something into her head. She's asking about asafoetida, and I was just going to mention it. It's so funny. Roxanne says, do you use asafoetida much? It smells so potent, and I'm nervous to use it. Oh, Roxanne, great question. So asafoetida is a spice. It is used a lot in Indian cooking, and many people feel that it brings a garlic flavor to their food. And she's making an awesome point, which is that it smells really strong. And so she's saying she's scared to use it. Roxanne, don't be scared. Dive in, use the amount that's suggested in a recipe, or if you're veering out on your own and you just want to use it to add garlic flavor to your recipe, literally start with a pinch. Like if something says, where it used to say 1 garlic clove, instead of 1 garlic clove, use a pinch. Not only is it potent in flavor, and it will bring that flavor to the dish, but that sort of intense aroma, it's not going to be like that in the food. It will mellow out a bit in the food. So check that out. Also, for those of you who are gluten-free, now, of course, the low FODMAP diet is not a gluten-free diet. However, for those of you who are gluten-free, read the labels, because a lot of asafoetida that I have seen on the market is based in a wheat product. So just know that, read your labels, which you always should anyway, but from a low FODMAP perspective, it's fine. So try it and let us know. So what other dishes? I think that, you know, cooking at home, I think cooking simply is always easier. Not only from a perspective of not having to buy lots of ingredients and spices and what have you, but it just helps us keep our FODMAPs in check, because the one other thing I'm going to mention before we sign off is FODMAP stacking. FODMAP stacking is when, so let's say you buy a product and it is FODMAP friendly, or it's Monash University certified, and it tells you you can have half a cup of whatever the product is. Well, you know that that is solid information because that product's been lab tested, you know what your serving size is, you're good to go. But let's say you're cooking at home and you're using your app and you are following along and it's telling you, this particular vegetable is low FODMAP in this amount, and this vegetable is low FODMAP in that amount, and this fruit and, you know, whatever. But you're adding all of these ingredients together in one dish. That's FODMAP stacking. So you have to understand, once everything comes together in a recipe, you have to go back and look at all the different amounts. You need to do some math, and that's going to help you come up with your serving size. Because if you don't take the stacking of FODMAPs into account, you very well could end up eating too much of whatever it is that you're making. So, you know, no one's coming up with a recipe. Ruth is with us from Australia. Thank you so much. It's late for you guys. I really appreciate it. We will be doing more. Robin and I keep saying we are going to do more of these videos, and we do want to. And if you guys have questions, if any of you want to give us suggestions for future videos, we would be happy to entertain that. I think that the biggest thing is don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of diving into the kitchen, of cooking just like you used to, or maybe you're cooking really for the first time because you need to control your diet. And that's a great thing. This is cooking at home is going to offer you a measure of control. And that way it's going to be easier for you to follow the diet and to get as healthy as possible. Kirsty says, hey, Kirsty, that's such an interesting name. I won't even try to pronounce your last name. I would love to know where you're joining us from. So any other questions right before we sign off? We would love to know. In general, don't be afraid of cooking. Robin is saying, oh, you know, Robin's telling me, she's like writing me these notes that like should be obvious. FODMAP it. So we have this program at FODMAP Everyday that we called FODMAP It. And this is where we will take a favorite recipe of yours and we will FODMAP it. Meaning we will recreate it to be low FODMAP. We will do all that math for you with the FODMAP stacking. We will recreate the recipe. We will tweak it. We will figure out how we can make as close a rendition as possible for you and still have it be low FODMAP. So if you want to send us your soups, your casseroles, your holiday dishes, whatever it is, Robin put up a link. You can go to that and we would love to see your recipe. What we do is if we think a recipe has a good potential for our FODMAP It program, we will we'll write back to you anyway, but we'll write back to you. We'll do a little interview with you, find out where the recipe came from, what the history of it is, because it's always interesting to see what foods people love to eat. Were they, a childhood favorite? Was it from a cookbook that's falling apart that was given to you by your grandmother? I love FODMAPing recipes that come from different people. Roxanne is saying, thank you. Roxanne, try that asafoetida and let us know what you're going to use with it. Hold your nose, take a pinch, put it in the dish, and you'll be fine. Hopefully this was helpful for you. We're going to be signing off. For all of you, thank you to Joanne and Marnie. I know we got off to a slow start with the tech. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us. And all of you who are participating in the Everyday Nutrition FODMAP Challenge program, you could not be in better hands. The light's at the end of the tunnel for you. You're going through your challenges now. You're going to find out every day how you are going to be able to create your own, I call it personal FODMAP roadmap. And eating food is going to get easier and easier and better and better. And you can find me or Robin at FODMAP Everyday if you have any follow-up questions. Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Ruth. Everybody's saying thank you. Thank you for sticking with us. Have a great day. Have a great evening. Colleen, hopefully your little baby fell asleep. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you again sometime soon. Bye.